I will apologize in advance for any shadows that might be created and may prevent you from seeing any details. Just let me know. I am in direct sunlight, and so there may be shadows that get in the way. Just let me know. Okay, so I had said we will begin with a thinner yarn today to learn the tabby weave. I actually have a variety of thicknesses and what I call thick and thin. I do not knit or crochet, so I can't tell you the exact weights of the yarn that I'm working with. So we're gonna go with bulky, thinner, that's still chunky, and thin. As you can see, this is pretty tiny, at least in my opinion, when you're looking at a hoop that is, let's say, this big. So what we can do actually when we prepare is either use it singly like this, or we can double up in order to create a different width or a different thickness. Since this is pretty thin, I am probably going to show you both. And how I begin, if I'm using both, let's say, is by tying a knot at the end of the two ends, and then wrapping it around my finger, crossing it over once, pushing it, and then pulling it through. And then that creates the knot that I prefer to use. And I actually use this instead of a needle whenever I double up on my thin yarns when I use them. So I will start all the way, let's say actually towards the middle. And we're gonna change our mind and go to the end, because I think it'll be easiest for you to be able to see what it is that I'm working with and how I am moving. Whenever I double up like this, of course, as you saw me move this all the way through, you come to one end that you've knotted, and then one end that is a loop. And so easiest thing for me to do is to just go ahead and, rather than knot around one of these strings, is I pull that loop, lay it under both strings, and then I simply thread this almost like it's the eye of a needle. So it doesn't matter how far you go, but I kind of like it laying a little bit close to that warp thread. I'm threading it through that loop. And since it's so long, I'm going to go ahead and hold the other part of this loop that I've created and threaded through, just so I can hold it tight and it doesn't get tangled. So as you can see, I picked back up the knotted end and I have pulled it through that loop, and I'm just going to keep doing that. I've come to almost the end, so I'll just tighten it up. And then, ta-da, you don't have to worry about making a knot to secure it to the warp thread and ultimately to your hoop. Now, I'm gonna flip this around because this is how I weave. I'm probably gonna say this multiple times, but there is no right or wrong way to weave. That is what I enjoy about weaving, because since there's no right or wrong way, then you can really feel free to do what you want and not have to worry about moving precisely. Now, there are actual stitches that you will be learning, so I suppose you could say that is a right and wrong way. But even then, I don't really like right and wrong. I mean, otherwise it's not fun. So here's what we're gonna do. This is what the hoop looks like again. And since we're on the outside, I am gonna not worry about going in between the threads because this is so thin, and because I feel like the tension that will be created between going over and under will hold this thin yarn better. So that's just kind of a little background. To begin, I am going to go ahead and drop my yarn down here, and then I'm going to pull it all the way through and thread it back up again. So what that looks like from the side is taking my knot, I'm going to drop it through, that's like this, and then I'm going to pull it up under the next warp thread. So it's going to look like this, kind of from the side, and then I'm just gonna pull it all the way through. And this is the first action you've got for your tabby weaving. Now you'll notice it is above the next warp thread. It's under here and it's going to go over the next one. And so then all you have to do, my fingers are long, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to do this, but I rest the hoop on my, I forgot what it's called, the webbing, that sounds weird, but between your index finger and the thumb, and I rest that hoop on there, and then I pinch between the warp thread and the yarn. It could either be this one, or it could be the one you're going over. Either way, once this is over that warp thread, then I'm going to drop the knot again between the two warp threads that are right there. So again, I've gone under here, over this one, the next one, and then I'm going to drop it through. Pull it all the way through, and then I am left with, we'll ignore this right now. We're going to start it all over again. We're going to pull this yarn, and we're gonna pop it between these two warp threads. Then pull it tight, like this. And I've noticed that one of my spokes has gotten a little bit less wide on this than this one. So I'm just gonna nudge these. Again, not really precise, so these might move, and that's fine. You just can easily slide them back and forth. Once the yarn is all in place, all of that will create like a tension to keep this from moving after you've completed it. So don't worry about that right now. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and continue over and under. So pulling this knot through, and then warp thread gonna go under that, and then pulling it between the next two warp threads. I'm gonna do this just a couple more. I'm not a big symmetrical person, so I am not going to go all the way around my hoop. So roughly, this looks good to me. It's a little bit, like not quite an even quarter, but I prefer that anyway. I'm going to turn around by, that last one went under a warp thread, and that's how you always want to turn if you'll be turning. What you'll do then is, after I've popped up my knot through this, between those two warp threads, I don't want this loop, but I just wanted to show you again. So I'm just gonna undo that real quick. Okay, pulling through. Okay, so that's left me with, if I wanted to continue, it would be over that next thread, but I don't wanna do that. So I'm going to bend it forward. I turn my hoop. I'm gonna adjust how this yarn looks, and I realize I think I'm alternately calling it yarn and thread, but I hope you know I mean yarn when I do this. And then warp thread should be referring to this nice peachy string kind of thing. Okay, so now that I have bent backwards, I'm going to reverse what I did. You want these stitches to be alternating as you go along. So since this one went over and then under, I want to wrap around the warp thread I just went through. I'm going to drop down my knot, pull it all the way through, and then I'm going to bounce right back up and pull the knot upwards between the next two warp threads. It's a little bit trickier since I'm showing y'all how to do this, but pull it tight, and as you can see, you've got an alternating, this one's over, this one's under, this yarn is under, and then this yarn we've just worked with is over. And let me back up. Oops, sorry about that. I said you want to pull it tight, but you don't want to pull any yarn too tight as you go along. What that does is it can affect the tension between the warp strings, but also if you end up leaving it a little bit loose like I have, it lets you be able to play around with basically how fluffy and the texture of the actual yarn within the hoop is going to be. For example, if I pull this really tight, you'll see it slides down. But you can also see, even if I adjust it and it's tight, it's got a really tight weave, and that will continue if you keep going over and under with that tabby weave. Let me show you real quick. Okay, so you can see this is tight, if I slide it up just a little bit, it's still a really tight weave. If you have seen my Instagram page, you'll notice that I prefer really fluffy, really soft textures. So what I end up doing is, oops, sorry about that, is I prefer a looser stitch. So you can literally just pull it if you found yourself too tight, and then you can just leave it loose. Now, I'm going to go, oops, moving that spoke again. I'm going to go ahead and drop over this next work thread. There's no particular reason, to do that. You could just, reverse over and continue a stitch like this. I kind of prefer when I'm working in a hoop to kind of stretch it out just a little bit by moving always past the next one whenever I come back to that side. I don't really think that makes much sense, but I don't know another way to say that right now. So let me just show you. I'm going to go a little bit quicker. So I am going over that work thread, going to drop through my knot, and then pull it through, and then I'm going to reverse on this side. So that means I'm going to wrap around under, and I'm going to pull through my knot, and going to go ahead and, pull that through. That entire wrapping around that warp string right here, that warp thread. Okay, pulling it a little bit tight. I'm going to show you what it looks like in a little bit closer to real time. I don't weave that quickly anyway, but just to kind of show you, okay, if I'm not pausing, what would it look like? And you can go slower. There's absolutely no right pace again. So when I'm not dropping it through, I use more like a sewing needle and thread motion. So I actually, it's not cheating, but I take my knot, I drop it in between, and I actually push it and hold it with my index finger. And then I use my thumb and just pinch it right back. Don't worry if that was really confusing, we can come back to that. But otherwise, I'm gonna do this on one row. You see I pull it, go over, under, pull it a little bit. I'm not gonna worry that it's sliding down here. And then, because this was under, I'm gonna go over this one and under this one. And then I'm gonna pull it, and you'll see it's not too tight. And then I will just move it gently up to meet the other yarn. So now the other way again, if you're just beginning, totally fine to just place your knot, drop it down, pull it over, bounce back up. This is a little bit tricky. So, and then hold it in place somehow, pull it through. And that's, again, you've wrapped around or under this warp thread. Gonna repeat, you can drop down your knot. Oh, sorry, pull it through. And then poke it back up again, pull it through, drop it down between the next warp threads, pull it, pop it up, and pull it through, drop it down, and then again, it's gonna go under this next warp thread, so you've dropped it, under the next warp thread, pop up your knot, woof, woof, sorry, and hold it and pull it up. Now, I don't actually ever weave this flat, but I wanted to do that to show you what it looks like. Now, typically what I do is actually hold it, also again, kind of resting that hoop on my, this is the heel of my hand actually, obviously, and then I kind of just hold the hoop however it's comfortable for me. Then I am going to reverse one more stitch. Actually, going for me, this is how I prefer, but you don't have to do this technique or this style. Then I'm gonna go reverse. So I hold it like this, and I'm gonna go pushing that knot in between the warp threads, and then just pushing it right back up again. Over, under, pull a little bit, over, under. And because I'm impatient, I will probably go the whole row and then leave it loose and push it up. But I I just wanted again to show you what that looks like. Under, over, push it up, leaving it loose. So what the rest of that would look like is this. Okay, now if you, oops, that is too tight. So if this is as far as you want to go, like me, what I'm going to do is just bend it back as if I'm going to reverse and do another row, but instead I am going to drop or push this knot so that it drops to the back of the hoop, and I flip it over because that's how I work. I'm going to flip it over, and then you can see, like, you know, as we did before, that there are these threads that are, or excuse me, the yarn that is kind of wrapped around the spoke. Since this is a knot and I have this loose enough, what I'm going to do is kind of gently separate the two rows that have been created from the front and the back, and I'm going to push up that knot between. Okay, I don't really expect anyone to get this, so not in a bad way. If you do, fantastic, but if you don't, I don't blame you. I would not get this either. But so I'll also show you an alternate way you can finish this. I will show you at the end, and basically you just leave a longish tail. That's what we call this end piece right here, and we clip it off, and we will worry about tucking that in later.